Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is Feb 11, 2024. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast. I'm probably wrong about everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Dimitri Rimsky for part two. Wow, 3 months ago we did part one. Thank you for doing part two, Dimitri. And where in
My
the heck
pleasure.
You calling in from?
I'm calling from my house in Washington, Connecticut.
Washington, CT. So we covered a lot. The last part we kind of ended, and I didn't get the final. We were talking about enemies and evil people, and I wanted to resolve one more little question in that regard, and it is, we talked about whether humans were hardwired for competition, and so it leads into this quote from Nassim Taleb. And he said, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. My friend said, well, villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. And Gregory Bateson, who's in the news right now, said, when the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff that day? Or does he go, I did something morally and socially wrong? So it's a lot of prompts, but the basic question, Dimitri, is, does punishment work?
Well, the death sentence certainly ends one problem. So I'm not sure that's a good solution. I think it depends on the individual. I think some people, when faced with punishment, recognize contrition and a failing of their decision making for their own betterment or for the betterment of those who care for them. I would assume that there's a certain element within all criminality, and I would therefore extend it to all of humanity. There's a certain element of psychotic or sociopathic, I should say, sociopathic tendency that is devoid of that kind of conscience, and maybe even incapable of contrition. So in that regard, punishment doesn't work. It's merely another environment in which to try to operate their sociopathic behavior. And so they become the leader of a gang in prison, and they're the ones that do whatever they do in that circumstance. I think, to back up for a minute, though, you're talking about what was that? The games were invented to make people think that they were winners.
It's funny because I usually go out of the, what do you do with an enemy into this? But it used to be, are you hardwired for competition? So Nassim Taleb says, games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, you don't know who wins or loses, but you can tell who a hero is.
Yeah, well, ironically, tonight's the Super Bowl, talking about the illusion of games, right? I mean, it's an absolute, we're focused on a game that is in many ways insignificant in the grand scheme of human development. So what?
Yeah.
If there's a hero in tonight's Super Bowl, it's probably Taylor Swift, by no fault of her own. I think that I think there's some truth to his quote that there is a false elevation of heroism to the star athlete. Nothing to take away from their accomplishment in their ability to do whatever it is that they participate in. I'm always admire that kind of physicality. I think it should be admired. I think it should even be exalted.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, when some 14-year-old girl can do 14 twists over an 8-inch bar in the middle of nowhere, I'm pretty thrilled. There are a number of situations. I mean, you watch Usain Bolt running down the track, and you're like, holy God, what a magnificent display of physicality. So let's not take anything away from the athletes. I think the more important question is, are we hardwired for competition? I
Yeah.
mean, that's really the essence of it. Well, I suppose if we get back to the, to, anthropology or socio animal behavior, we have to start back. We have to start looking at gorillas and chimpanzees and bonobos or whatever, right? And is competition hardwired in that environment? Well, pretty obvious that the silverback is constantly having to fend off other competitors. And that's true across the animal world, pretty much. And there seems to be a reason for that in the scheme of survival. Maybe it's the luxury of having your seeds spread among many females. That's one explanation. Maybe it's because you want to eat a better banana, or at least a banana as opposed to nothing. I mean, there seems to be an element of that. I have a feeling about the equilibrium within human behavior. I mean, competition does something. It establishes leadership, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So competition has a value because in that sense, it affirms a certain kind of leadership. And leadership has an essential value to the survival of the group. The problem is that leadership without cooperative behavior behind it fails.
Yeah.
So that means that the second dynamic, or an equal dynamic in human behavior or animal behavior, is cooperative behavior.
Yeah.
And whether it's monkeys or wolves or any other predatory animal, and we are a predatory animal after all, cooperative behavior is essential. I don't care how big the silverback is. I don't care how big the wolf is. If the other wolves don't participate in the kill, the hunt fails. And human behavior is a perfect example of that. And we have survived by cooperative behavior, whether it was hunting and gathering or agriculture. None of those things occur without cooperative behavior, but they also don't function well if there isn't some guiding leadership to direct that purpose. So I think there's an equilibrium there between the two. We're experiencing right now a disequilibrium of significant proportions, and that's causing chaos everywhere.
Yeah. Really heavy, Dimitri, because it opens up what I'm doing this lecture called Can Art Stop War? And the basic question is, I ask the people, how do we stop our governments from going to war? But the bottom line, real question is are humans hardwired for cooperation, or are they hardwired for killing and violence? And Maria Gombudas, the archaeologist, kind of proved in the anthropology world that there were cultures that had no warfare. But most people say, no, we're hardwired for violence. What do you think?
I don't think. I think that's a little too easy because, yeah, certainly the preponderance of evidence over human history has been violence. Okay, we understand that. That's the most obvious dynamic that we can attribute to ourselves, right? But okay, so that's a simple thing. But how does that explain Botticelli? How does that get us past Spinoza? What does that do for Robespierre? Where do we go with all the literature and art and oh my God, the simple caring for a child? All of these things that are part of the human experience are countervailing to that simple hypothesis that violence is the main attribute of human behavior.
Yeah.
I don't believe it is.
Yeah.
And I think that what we are constantly confronted with is to find a medium between the two dynamics that exist even within the individual, let alone the group. And unfortunately, group behavior is easily swayed by a very small activity of people. It doesn't take a lot of people. A couple of thugs that support the leader can pretty much control a group for a significant period of time, but eventually they fail. And they've failed consistently across history. And what has always come out of that is the ability to try to move forward in a more enlightened manner.
Yeah.
I mean, Gandhi said that all dictators fail. Well, he's right. It may take 100 years for a hierarchy to collapse, but okay, what's 100 years in the 20,000 or so years of our behavior? I don't know. I mean, we're looking at some very dire circumstances in the world right now, and they're showing the failure of violence as a solution almost across the board, and yet we persist.
We persist. Amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, Dimitri, if Trump gets thrown in jail, he writes a book and says, "I'm sorry, I did wrong." Would you forgive him?
No, he's not. He's not capable of that. If he did that, it would be a contrivance. Let's face it. I mean, he's a sociopath. He's not and a narcissist. He's not capable of any insight into himself beyond his own intentions for glory. Yeah. He's not. He's a limited human being, and it's quite obvious that he is. Anybody who knows anything about their own introspection as a person can evaluate that, and if they can't evaluate that, it's because they've failed to appreciate their own qualities, and they have given themselves over to somebody who has promised them a falsehood, and they're doomed. And but that's been the case forever. I mean, I don't want to beat up on the Germans, but they were an intelligent, enlightened, educated people, and they went down the road blithely singing away. Well, how do you explain that? That wasn't a bunch of dumb people. They were an educated population, and they still went off on the tangent. And we can look at more benign situations. We can look at the British Empire or the Roman Empire or any number of other empires where an elite group of people guided an absolutely ruthless campaign to control lesser enabled people across the globe. I mean, think about this for a second. This little tiny island sends a bunch of ships to the subcontinent of India, plants the Union Jack on the ground, and says, "We now own you." And India was not a highly developed civilization. Of course it was. And yet they were capable of controlling that for what, 300 years?
Wow.
With what? Because they had a flag? I mean, that's an Izzy Izzard joke, You can't take us over. Well, do you have a flag? We don't need a flag. We're already here. Well, but you don't have a flag. I mean,
Eddie Izzard joke. That is a good joke. Like, in order for us to take you over, if you don't have a flag, it's open game. You're open game.
You don't mean anything.
Yeah.
You know, and the Spaniards did the same. The Portuguese did the same. The Belgians did the same. What? And you know, not to just deride Western civilization. You know, the Chinese weren't any charmers. I mean, they just marched into Tibet without even a second thought. And if the Vietnamese hadn't been such a scrappy little bunch of people, they would have gone down into Indochina.
Yeah. That reminds me of, they said Columbus was the first illegal alien.
I mean, he was, you know, I mean, he just was, you know, he was lost and he made up for it by trying to make himself look like a hero. There's a good example of false heroics right there.
False heroics. That's a great way to put it.
You know, yeah, I just stumbled across these people running around half clothed in the Caribbean like any other tourist would be. And we decided that we own them. Well, yeah, okay, Columbus. You know, you can go back to the Queen and tell her you got her an island where nobody wears clothes.
So good this is Utah Phillips, a great labor activist folk singer, said anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?
Well, usually the rules usually come out of the common sense necessity of survival.
Yeah.
And once those have been established, then the question is, to what end do the people who have power to manipulate those rules take control? So the rules of agriculture are you have to plant and you have to tend your crop and you have to harvest your crop and you have to eat your food. That's the rules of agriculture. And that's a cooperative behavior by and large. Yeah. Who said anything that for every 10 bushels that you harvest, 5 of them have to go to the government?
Yeah.
Okay, well, that's rule making of a whole different magnitude.
What's the difference between rights and responsibilities?
Interesting. Well, if you don't have a sense of responsibilities, and that must somehow come from a sense of inner, an inner sense of common value, then rights become a relative term, don't they?
Yeah.
I mean, if you don't understand that the person you're about to kill, because you have rights that you don't give them, then you're impoverished in your sense of responsibility as a human being. Because in essence, the person you're about to kill cares for his children and bleeds the same blood that you do.
Yeah.
So, you know, rights is to a large extent a contrivance, I think. You know, I think, you know, so is morality to some extent.
Yeah.
We have an innate understanding of what is necessary to work in concourse with each other. Anything that we do to violate that is an act of greed and selfishness.
What's the difference between rebellion and revolution?
Well, it's a fine line, because you can rebel against something and it may not lead to revolution. It may lead to change without revolution. To some extent, rebellion is very often the first stage of change. Depending on the resistance to that rebellion, very often becomes the cause for revolution, right?
Yeah. This socialist John Basil Barnhill said, "Where the people fear the government, you have tyranny. Where the government fears the people, you have liberty." The film V for Vendetta paraphrased it. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people. Dimitri, how do you personally handle false fears like the war on drugs? Well, you can't have a war on drugs because drugs don't fight. You can't say no to drugs because drugs don't talk. But they create these false fears. War on drugs, war on poverty, war on terrorism. How do you personally handle false fears?
Well, you have to first understand the causal relationship. So the causal relationship in the war on terrorism is that a minority of people, generally fanatical, not necessarily, they may be unjustly treated people, but their only recourse is to act in ways of uh, sporadic interference in the mechanism of society, and by doing that disruption, they achieve a certain presence. And so now, what do we say to that? I mean, we're dealing with that in the Middle East right now. You know, I mean, if you look at the discussion or the however you want to frame it, you know, is Hamas justified in coming over the border and killing 1,200 Israelis? Is there a justification for doing that? Well, one argument is that Hamas is that the Palestinians are a downtrodden and much abused and disenfranchised people. What recourse do they have against their oppressor? The other side of that is, okay, somebody has done something vicious and untoward, and we're going to punish them for that. And the result is disproportionately hideous, absolutely hideous. And yet there doesn't seem to be any countervailing effort against that. I mean, there is some, but, you know, and the argument goes back and forth. Well, the situation has been unjust for certainly since 1950, when Israel was created, and the conflict between these people probably goes back 2,000 years. Do we have a simple solution? I don't think so.
Yeah.
But in terms of evaluating that, you have to look at the causal relationships. There was another example, not terrorism, but something else you mentioned.
War on drugs.
Yeah. Okay. So again, you know, I mean, the war on drugs is a much more benign example than the Middle East. You have a situation in which an element is introduced into the society which causes hardship, it causes disruption, it causes all manner of difficulties on one level, and that level is considered to be a negative to the social good. Well, hard to argue that, having lived in crack neighborhoods and heroin addicts, I certainly can attest to the fact that it's not a very pleasant environment to live in, because you're dealing with people who are under the influence of something that controls them more than they have any conscious effort. So, okay, not a pleasant thing. On the other hand, you know, Why was the CIA bringing heroin out of Southeast Asia during the Vietnam War? And why do we have connections to the cartels in South America through similar veins? I mean, after all, Noriega was one of our boys. When he decided to go rogue, we went and stepped on it.
Yep.
So what's the deal? I mean, we the war on drugs. What's the war on drugs? Have we ever arrested a white banker for laundering their money? No. It's the brown people that have been harassed on both ends of the spectrum, the growers and the sellers.
Yeah.
And to some extent, if you really look at some of that, without the drug economy in certain areas of this country, there would be no economy.
Yep.
That's a hard thing to look at, but it's true. So if you removed the drug economy from those people, what would replace it?
Yeah.
There is no answer to that because they've already been disenfranchised by the power.
Yeah.
So the war on drugs, it's not a war on drugs. It's a war on disenfranchised people in your society that you don't want to have. You don't want to give the power to give them equality within your system.
Yeah.
So okay, very convenient. But is it a lot different than making Cesar Chavez a villain or a hero?
Yeah.
I mean, what was his fault? Because he spoke out about the disenfranchisement of migrant workers.
Yeah.
And the almost level of slavery that they were operating under. That makes him criminal? No, of course not.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we're at this thing now where we're going on about the immigrants and the blah, blah, blah. Okay. What's the causal situation? Well, if you look at the Central and South American nations that are in a state of chaos, who has benefited from their mismanagement over the last 200 years?
Yeah.
What, we don't want to talk about United Fruit. We don't want to talk about any number of other hideous corporate operations in those areas that have denuded them of their resources and put them in put dictators in charge of them that were graft-ridden, hideous little potentates. Why shouldn't they want to come someplace else?
Yeah.
And the same is true in Africa and the migration coming out of sub-Saharan Africa into Western cultures. The same thing is even more of an example of what happened in Syria.
Yeah.
I mean, that was an entirely that could have been altered significantly if the Western powers had not turned away from helping the Syrians when they wanted to take over their own government. And the power dynamic that went on during that period was ridiculous. And what happened? All of a sudden, you have a failed population that starts migrating up through the Balkans into Central Europe, and everybody gets freaked out. Most example of which is the Hungarians and the Poles. So what did they do? They became xenophobic, and they suddenly, started electing dictators to protect them from the invasion of these people that it could have been prevented by keeping them where they were, by helping them establish a more equitable world. People in Southern Africa, same problem. Why would you want to live in Southern Africa?
Yeah.
I mean, of course you want to go to Italy. I would if I were living there.
Yeah.
So the idea of false fears has always been there. I mean, it's those damn Protestants. It's those horrible Catholics. It's those Sunnis. It's the Shiites. It's the Hindus. It's the Muslims. It's how many false fears do you want to create? It's, what false fear? It's the group of apes that live on the other side of the river that are going to come over and take the water from our side.
Yeah.
Like that's not, So yeah, false fears. It's very easy to make people susceptible to that.
Yeah.
I mean, the real fears are situations where you have people that are operating under the belief of those false fears and are acting those out.
Yeah.
That's a real fear.
Yeah.
I'm more afraid of Magna red hats armed with M16s than I am some Honduran trying to get his family across the Rio Grande.
Yeah. Really. Well, Dimitri, walk us through your tipping points for your main callings, because it's interesting. You were in the midst of, like me, the Vietnam War, anti-war movement, knowing that that was existing. In fact, in part one, you talked about your friends and going to Chicago, the Democratic Convention, and you sussed it out well. But something along that line of when you're in college, where's your tipping points to pursue, art, graphic design, poetry, mime? Where's those tipping points where you're in college and go, this is what I'm going to pursue?
Well, I don't. It's kind of like asking a juggler what ball he's going to catch next.
Well, I mean, you could go wherever you want, because I mean, you've done a lot of different skills, but
I can kind of track it a little bit. I mean, the whole mid to late 60s, early 70s, and you can pretty much petered out by then. But that whole 7 or 8 year period in our culture was pretty mind opening.
yes,
And that wasn't just the drugs that were doing that. The real shift. I mean, we're talking about the baby boomers anyway. Okay, just for starters. All right.
yeah,
Okay, so you're dealing with a population of young people who had been inculcated in the Cold War. The evil red was going to come over and wipe us out, and they're godless people and Marxists and fuck all, and So and we were spending most of our childhood hiding under our desks and digging fallout shelters in our backyard as part of our childhood games. That's baby boomers. And
yes,
we were told that we lived in an idyllic society. Okay.
yeah,
That was our justification for standing up against the evil of communism, blah, blah, blah. All right. That was the justification for all of it. Okay. Wherever you want to put the pointer on the map, Vietnam, Dominican Republic or Haiti or any other stupid thing we did, that's our justification, because we have an innate right. We're on the path, the golden path. That was the inculcation. Okay. Well, the problem is that a number of things occurred in the process, not the least of which was the civil rights movement. Not the least of which was the fact that television presented that in a way that nothing had prior to the existence of that medium. Okay, so in the history before that, you didn't see fire hoses and attack dogs and blah 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 attacking people trying to get the voting right. Okay, you didn't see it. You may not have even heard about it.
right.
But with television, absolutely, 6 o'clock news. There was Uncle Walter telling you what was going on in Selma. Not to mention the assassination of Kennedy, which you saw in living moments. Not to mention the assassination of Ruby, not to mention the assassination of JFK, not to mention the assassination of Martin Luther King, not to mention, every manner of upheaval and craziness that exemplified the failing of that idyllic country that you were inculcated to believe in. So here you are, you're a 16, 17, 18-year-old person, well educated, I might point out, and all of a sudden you have to question everything that you've been taught, because everything that you're seeing on a daily basis contravenes everything that you were told. And you have to make a choice. Do I believe what I innately understand to be right, or do I simply go along with the propaganda that has been shoved down my throat? Well, the answer was pretty simple for most of it. For some of us, not all of us, but for some of us, the answer was pretty simple. Fuck this.
Yeah.
We're going to create our own society. We're going to live by our own set of values. We're going to find a better and another way. Well, there was some delusion involved with that. One of which was that we certainly didn't understand the depth to which we were trying to uproot a systematic oppression.
Well, Dimitri, it's summarized by Joni Mitchell in that interview a couple of years ago in Canada. She said, we were hippies, then we were yippies, and now we're all yuppies.
Yeah, that's a little too simple.
It is simple, but I mean, we had this awareness, like you went off on the word tipping point. That was a tipping point for us to gain some higher awareness. Like, what the heck's going on here? Right.
Well, but the problem, as I just pointed out, was that we didn't understand the depth of the malevolence. I mean, if you're operating on this highly idealized utopian kind of value system, and you think, well, we should aspire to this, to implement the value system that we have been told was what we should be living by. Okay, we were told we should live under this. Okay, we'll buy that. You told us that was the right way to live. Now we're going to call you on it.
Yeah.
Okay, we're going to call you on it. And what's the first thing that everybody who had any kind of investment in the status quo was, oh, no, you're not. You're not going to call us on this because you don't understand the reality of the world around you.
Right.
Well, yeah, we do understand the reality of the world, and it sucks. We want to change that. Well, we're not going to let you. And the depth to which that corporate governance, the roots of that are much, much deeper than we could have possibly understood. We understood at a certain level that it was malevolent and wrong. And for a few of us out here now in our 60s and 70s, we still understand that to be the case.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So what happened to that? What happened to those people other than Altamont, in which everybody points a finger at, which is bullshit? Okay. Yeah. No, what happened to that was that that's not how it changes. And the interesting thing in that is that without realizing it, we did change something. It was very unseen, very incremental, very unestablished. But nonetheless, the human individual relationships between people altered enormously. in terms of marriages, in terms of cohabitations, in terms of same-sex relationships, in terms of women's rights, even moderately, in terms of the civil rights to some extent. All of those things actually shifted.
Yeah.
Okay, not utopian shifting, not any grand process, but there was a shift. Okay, and they're still mitigating against that shift, because at a certain core of going back to your sense of false fears, at a certain core of that false fear is we will not be replaced. That's what the call of the white supremacists is. You shall not replace us. Nobody's going to replace you. You are going to be replaced because you're simply not seeing the wave of humanity moving over you, and there's nothing you can do about it. But, you're going to stand up against it. All right, well, you're going to make trouble for everybody, but eventually it'll wash over you, and that's going to be the way it is, because the world has to function on a different basis. And the basis it's functioning under now is failing.
Yeah.
And the evidence of it failing is everywhere.
Yep.
And, it's being accelerated by the fact that the entire global system of climate is altering.
Yeah.
And that means that everything that we understand to be constant is not going to exist. Rivers are not going to flow. Rivers are going to flood. Droughts are going to happen, prolonged droughts, prolonged rains. We're going to have longer winters, shorter winters, no snow, more snow. People are going to move in mass. Millions of people are going to move in mass. Millions of people are going to starve to death. They know it. They can see it because there's no food. Well, okay. What are you going to do about that? Well, if you can't elevate yourself to understand how to take advantage of the change going on, then you're going to be in the way of implementing any saving grace. Okay. But eventually we're going to be reduced to a necessity. And when that necessity is presented itself, those who understand it will make an effort to survive cooperatively, maybe. If you look at some of this dystopian, most dystopian fiction operates on the premise of some overarching power system. Right? So it's either, gangs in Mad Max, or it's the district control over Hunger Games, or, any number of those are the systems that are always presented.
Yeah.
What's the dynamic? Well, there are little groups of people that are cooperatively behaving in little corners, and then some roving band shows up and tries to take them over, and some hero comes and saves them, or what. Okay. Maybe that's going to be the way it works. I don't know. All I know is that we had some effect at the time, but we were also reduced to necessity. And the necessity was to survive. Well, okay, some of us became insurance agents, and car dealers, and Dad had a plumbing business, so we became plumbers. Okay, some of us didn't do that. I didn't do that. I got to a certain point where I was sort of going along, and the hippie thing was fading. My surreptitious behavior as a hashish entrepreneur was not a winning strategy in the long run. So I became a house painter. Okay, fine. I did that for a while. I live in a community. I was able to make some ways there. And then all of a sudden it presented itself that as a person who is involved in social activities, that I knew a lot of musicians, and the musicians were looking for work. So I went to some of the clubs and bars that I knew, and I said, I know musicians who can work in your bar. And they said, oh, well, that's great. I will hire you to put musicians in my bar. And the next thing I knew, I was a booking agent. Okay. And I did that for 10 or 15 years. Total coincidence. I mean, well, there was some intention to it, but I
Right.
can't say I was overly ambitious. I just stumbled into it. And
Yeah.
at a certain point along the line, that began to be a little less than rewarding. And some Moonies were coming into one of my nightclubs and trying to sell dead flowers, and I took exception to that. And I started telling them what I wanted them to do if they wanted to come back. And then I realized, why am I telling them how to sell flowers? So I put some makeup on and a tux and a tailcoat and a top hat and walked into one of my own clubs and sold $400 worth of roses.
Are you kidding? That was your mime experience?
Yeah.
Well, what kicked you over to that? Did you see Marcel Marceau? Did you
I just
have,
told you.
huh?
I just told you. I just told you. I was running nightclubs and
Right,
Moonies
right.
were
But I
coming
mean,
in.
why did you go mime? I mean, did
Oh,
you
well,
see?
that's pretty simple. First of all, you want to be entertaining.
Yeah,
Secondly, you want to assure the club owners that you're not going to harass people. Well,
yeah,
you can't harass people if you don't talk, right? And you're dressed up in your makeup, and you're an amusement in your very presence. So that's free entertainment.
yeah,
Okay, so by looking like something engaging, by presenting yourself as non-intrusive, you walk around in silence. If somebody wants you, you go to them.
yeah.
So you're not banging on their heads or yelling at them or anything. You're just walking around. And you look kind of cute and saucy and flirtatious. And, you know, I
Was
made a
it
living.
was
I
it
made a
fun?
living. Pardon?
Was it fun
Oh,
being a
God. Yeah, of course it was fun. Are you kidding? I mean, every woman in town wanted to know who I was, you know. And I was able to, I wanted to flirt with somebody, I would give them a rose. I saw some guy being an asshole to his woman, I would give her a flower. He would get furious, then he'd buy roses the next time he saw me. You know, at the same time, we were having a lot of fun. Yeah, of course, it was
yeah,
fun. I mean, there were moments that were pretty hideous, of course, because there were drunks and obnoxious people, and they're clown phobics that would get upset when they saw us coming. We didn't really know about them until we were out there, but there are actually quite a lot of people that are afraid of clowns.
yes.
So we did that for 10 years and or more, actually. And then through a various set of circumstances, I ended up moving back to my hometown. And it was it was too difficult to go into New Haven where my operation was. I had really not been able to figure out a way to franchise it. So it was really a limited operation and I couldn't really maintain it. And the club atmosphere culture had changed. And so I needed a job. And the coffee shop in my hometown was being totally inefficiently run. And because I had been a booking agent, I knew how to do promotional material. And I knew when you walk into a copy shop and you ask for copies, you don't expect to have to come back 3 days later. I want my copies. Somebody has to give you your copies. So I told them that I would do that job. And in the process, I learned computer graphics and graphic design. And in the process of learning graphic design, at a certain point, the internet began to develop, and it was evident that graphic design was going to merge into web design. And so I went back to school, took web design courses, and the next thing I knew, my graphic design clients were asking for websites. And I became a web designer, and I found a programmer and a server person, and we formed a company, and we did web design on our own with our own interface for 10 or 12 years. And that started to change when the responsive design systems for phones came in. And I got fed up with that because it didn't have any elegance to it from a design point of view. And I went back to painting houses. And I've been doing that ever since. And that takes you up to now.
Okay, but Dimitri, where'd you start writing poetry?
Oh, well, that was the little, that was the little disenfranchised preteen who didn't know what to do because he wasn't socially comfortable and he was an outsider. And, he was sitting in study hall and, and he was reading Eliot and et cetera, et cetera. And and it was a way of expressing myself. And by the time I was 17 or 18, I was doing it with some regularity. And then when I went to college, college was pretty disappointing because it seemed more like an extension of high school, which was a real drag. So I started going to the coffee houses and people would go, well, do you have any poetry? And I'd go, yeah, I'll read this. And they said, oh, that was pretty interesting. And that was that. I mean, for a while, at one point when I was living in Key West, I was living on my poetry readings.
But you've written poetry since age 18, on and off?
Well, yeah, and earlier, but yeah.
Okay, let's go into poetry for a second, if you don't mind.
No.
The screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're writing a poem?
Most of the time, my intent is to have the listener or the reader, and I tend to be more of an orator than my intent is to bring the listener to an unexpected emotional realization.
Yeah.
Because the focus of what I'm writing about is an emotional realization that I am disguising until I reveal it. So a very interesting fellow writer who works, who is part of a writing group that I belong to, recently is a Bosnian woman, very interesting writer. She's also an engineer. But she's a refugee, but also a citizen now. But she grew up in Bosnia, so she has a history that's fairly disrupted. Huh? Yeah. Bosnia, I mean, not a pleasant world. And she paid me a compliment that is absolutely stunning, and it's right on point about how I write. She said, listening to one of my poems is like listening to the sound of incoming artillery.
Wow. That is heavy, because you touched on this, Dimitri. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing your poem?
Oh, it's all about the person, the ear. It's all about the ear. I mean, if you're not writing for the ear, if you're not writing for the person to bring this into their, I mean, in my case, I prefer the ear to the, I mean, nobody sees my printed poetry. I mean, I don't have any printed poetry. I'm not published, except for maybe one or two little things. So basically, it's an oral process.
Yeah.
And I'm not very ambitious about it, but nonetheless, I do it frequently. So my intent is for the person to be captivated by an idea that they didn't necessarily see coming, and are then suddenly either seduced or distracted and suddenly confronted with. So for an example, I'll give you an example. I can't quote this poem. I don't have them memorized anymore. But okay, so I have a premise. Okay, the premise is Prometheus, We understand Prometheus stole fire and he was chained to a rock as a punishment. And every day a vulture would come and pick at his liver. And every night the liver would grow back. And every day the bird would return. Right? That's Prometheus, right? That's his punishment for giving us fire. My premise is, what if Prometheus had a girlfriend? What would she do? Suddenly her boyfriend's chained on a rock and this bird comes every day.
Yeah.
Well, what's the premise? Okay. Well, I talk about that and I say, well, obviously at a certain point, she couldn't take it anymore.
Yeah.
And you can't blame her for that.
Yeah.
It's not like she could tend this wound and it would heal. But no, the bird comes back. So she decides very justly that she can't endure this and it's not her punishment. She should have her own life. Right?
Yeah.
Every reasonable thing. Okay. So she has her own life. And then one night there's a knock at the door and she opens the door and there's Prometheus. He's escaped the bird. And the bird is there trying to get him. And the question is, what would you do?
You asked your listener that?
What would you do?
Yeah. Shut the door.
And
what do they say? Various responses?
Well, I don't give them a chance.
Oh, you just propose the question and leave it there. Yeah.
No, I propose the question and then I say very quietly, but what of her life now?
Yeah.
What of a world of a life forever pursued by these relentless talons? What of the man calling to her from a distant room?
Yeah.
What of that? So she would close the door and she would tell him, oh, it was only the wind.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, if you've been in any number of love affairs, you know that's the truth.
Yeah.
That's the truth of human relationships in certain circumstances.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like the Mallarmé's the symbolists don't paint the thing itself, paint the effect you want to have on the viewer.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there's sometimes when I'm much more blunt. Sometimes when I verge into politics, I tend to be a little bit more blunt. When I turn in, I just posted something a few days ago that I wrote about the cruelty of nature, if in fact nature has the capacity for cruelty.
Wow.
Well, I don't think it does. I don't think it cares. I don't think caring has anything to do with nature.
Right. Yeah.
But that doesn't excuse us.
Yeah.
And you can read that if you want, and you can see it. And I've done that in a number of circumstances where I'm trying to get at, people that, what do we do when we wake up and we find ourselves in a plastic bag of bureaucratic inadequacy?
Yeah.
Or inefficiency. I mean, what do we do with these creepy little human beings like Newt Gingrich and whatever?
Yeah.
So sometimes I range into that. Very often I'm more personal. Just at a recent reading, I read about an actual existing tree that as a child I carved my initials in. And I can go and visit that tree and I can see my initials, but they're being grown over by the bark of every new season.
Wow.
Okay. And in seeing that revelation, I realized that even though I recognize that I have made an effort to imprint myself on the world is growing me out. And in years from now, it'll be an indecipherable mark.
Yeah.
Well, why am I any different than the pharaohs?
Yeah.
They built these huge edifices for themselves, and who knows what the hell they were thinking of doing.
Yeah.
They made, and when the sun collapses, their effigies are going to disappear like dust.
Yeah.
So, what is the real thing that we should understand about life? What we should understand is that passion comes and goes like a season, but love grows from the inside out.
Yes. Can you forget to die?
No.
On poetry, you said something. Leo Bersani, he just passed away, a lit crit. He was doing a study on Mallarmé's poetry. And I'm curious your thoughts on this line. The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
Yeah, there's an interesting coincidence in that. I was just I had dinner with a friend of mine who had been very instrumental in transposing all of my handwritten poetry into Word documents, electronic documents.
Yeah.
And we were discussing, how grateful I was for that assistance. But we also were talking about the nature of my writing because she had experienced the full arc of it in the transposing process, which took months. And she said that she thought that, that one of the reasons I wasn't writing as much is because I'm not in conflict. I'm not in sorrow.
Yeah.
I'm not in some distress of some sort or the other. So, yeah, there may be some truth. What was the quote again?
Yeah, that's very good. Most people, I'm always trying to figure out what he means. And you really, it's the very crises that threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
Yeah, I wouldn't go quite that far into think of it as being threatened, but the fact that if you read a lot of poetry, and to be quite honest with you, I don't.
Yeah.
But I've read enough. There's very little exuberance in poetry except when someone falls in love.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you read Cummings, for example, one of his most exuberant things is his poem about love is more thicker than forget, more thinner than a wave is blah 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 blah. Okay, that's one of his most exuberant poems.
Yeah,
it's about love.
Yeah.
Some of the most exalted poetry is very often about love.
Yeah.
But you don't get a lot of exalted poetry for a bunch of other things. I mean, mostly there's some darker side to it, even if it's, I mean, Kipling and, being all patriotic and, Gunga Din and blah, blah, blah. There's always a darker side being revealed in those things. That's patriotic, or the charge of the light brigade, charge of the light brigade. Yeah, no, you read that poem and you realize there is something very much different going on. So, I mean, you look at these wonderful. I mean, obviously, I think I'll never see a thing as lovely as a tree. Blah blah blah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of that, but there are also, there's a poem by Sarah Teasdale that goes. Let it be forgotten as a flower is forgotten, forgotten as a fire that once was burning gold. Let it be forgotten forever and ever. Time is a kind friend, he will make us old. And if anyone asks, say it was forgotten as like a lost footfall in a long forgotten snow. What is she talking about? When over me bright April shakes out her rain-drenched hair, though you should lean above me broken-hearted, I shall not care. I shall have peace as leafy trees are peaceful when the rain bends down the bough. I shall be more silent and cold-hearted than you are now.
Oof.
That's a love poem.
Wow.
That's a broken-hearted love poem.
I love that. Who did that?
Sarah Teasdale.
Sarah Teasdale. Well, it's amazing.
Two poems by Sarah Teasdale, Let It Be Forgotten and Time is an Old Friend. I don't remember the other title. But yeah, 2 poems by Sarah Teasdale. I mean, one of my favorite poems that sort of has an interesting twist to it is by a writer named Arthur O'Shaughnessy. And I think I know an excerpt of it. We are the music makers, the dreamers of dreams, wandering by lone sea breakers and sitting by desolate streams, world losers and world forsakers on whom the pale moon gleams. Yet we are the movers, the shakers of the world forever, it seems. Out of the deathless ditties, we build up the world's great cities, and out of a fabulous story, we fashion an empire's glory. One man with a dream at pleasure shall go forth and conquer a crown, but three with a new song's measure can trample an empire down. We in the ages dying in the buried past of the earth, fill Nineveh with our singing and Babel itself with our mirth, and o'erthrew them with prophesizing to the old and the new world's worth. For each age is a dream that is dying, or one that is coming to birth.
Wow. That's very powerful.
Yeah. But there's a lot of powerful poetry. I mean, I just happened to memorize a couple. Some of my own poems aren't so bad either, but
I want to hear some.
But in essence, there has to be a certain tension.
Yeah.
At least for me. And I had to confess to some of my writing friends the other day when they asked me why I wasn't writing. I said, I'm spoiled.
Yeah.
Because up until recently, if I had an idea, I would sit down and it would just go out across the page, and I would go back and read it out loud to myself. And if there was an and or an or a but or some silly word that didn't fit, I would hear it. And I would change it. And after that, I'd do no more editing to it.
Yeah.
Well, that's spoiled. I mean, I don't consider myself a poet because I don't labor over my work.
Yeah.
There was a funny quote with when Ezra Pound was working on whatever the hell he was writing. Not my favorite poet, but somebody said, well, Mr. Pound, how is it coming? He said, yesterday I put a comma in and today I took it out.
Yeah.
I couldn't possibly think that way. And yet I know people who craft their work hour after hour after hour. Well, good for them. I can't do it. And right now, every once in a while, something comes to me. I had a funny little piece where I was out during the summer and I was looking up at the sky and I saw a star twinkling way, way up. And I realized it was a firefly up above the tree line. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing up there? What kind of dumb heroics is that? What other firefly is going to go, oh, he's the guy for me.
Yeah.
He's the one way up there. I'm one, he's all by himself up there. And I was sort of did this little conversation with him. But, it wasn't a particularly good poem, and I haven't wasted much more time to think about it. But it was just a moment, There was another moment when I was walking outside and a daffodil had come up, and you know how daffodils, like, when they come up, they like all of a sudden go like, mob behavior. They all come up everywhere. Well, there was this one straggling daffodil all by itself with no companions. And I thought to myself, I should pick a daffodil and bring it back to my lady friend And then I thought, no, I shouldn't do that. What I should do is I should go and get her and show her that
Go
flower,
where it.
not
Yeah.
kill it for the sake of some silly pride.
Yeah.
Huh?
No, that's Eastern philosophy. I learned that.
Yeah.
That in the West, we pick it. In the East, they smell it and leave it in its place. But you know what you said, Dimitri, evoked a lot of things. One was Kenneth Rexroth said the function of poetry is to subvert the bourgeois and woo your lover. So you know, this is McLuhan saying everything we invent extends some humanness. So knife and fork extends our teeth, the shutter in a camera or a projector extends our eyelid, and maybe even non-tangible like religion or philosophy is extension of consciousness. What does the writing utensil extend for you? When you're writing a poem, whether it's a keyboard or a pen,
I always write with a pen.
what humanness is the pen extending for you?
Empathy.
Yes. And T.S. Eliot said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Well, it varies. Tenderness,
Yeah.
sarcasm,
Yeah.
cynicism,
Wow.
and encouragement.
That's really powerful. Thank you. So, two of my film heroes have this mantra, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. And Cecil Taylor, the jazz pianist, said, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more self-expression or more it's a vehicle for whatever technologies, environments, and cultures are dominant?
Well, I think, I mean, the idea of a muse goes back centuries, right? I mean, the Greeks, the whatever, there was always some deity that was giving you, I don't really know that. I buy that, I don't know if I'm a vehicle for some external thing, I'm a vehicle for sure, but I don't know whether it's it's passing through me or if I'm generating it. I tend to think I'm the generator, not the pass through. But I think a lot of artists like to use that. Oh, my muse, well, who is she? Where the fuck has she been recently?
Yeah.
The fucking faithless tart is off inspiring somebody else. What about me? So yeah, that's the thing excuse. I don't buy that. What was the second part of the other quote?
You covered it. Actually, the second part is, can art making be egoless?
Yeah, no, fuck that. I mean, if you don't have a sense of identity, where do you formulate your thoughts from? I mean, I told you about the tree that I carved my name. Well, it comes from an experience of myself.
Yeah.
Where does my idea of Prometheus having a girlfriend and her denying him salvation? Where does that come from? It comes from experience.
Yeah.
And I use a vehicle to discuss that experience in a way that traps the viewer into understanding it's happened to them, or it could. So, okay. So no, I don't think egolessness. I don't think you can stand in front of an empty canvas and be egoless. I mean, it's the height of ego.
Yeah.
To think that you're going to put a brush to that empty canvas. I mean, I have an interesting little story. I know I was working for an artist that lived in this area. His name was Cleve Gray. And he worked in very large abstract canvases. And he'd hired me to come to his barn where he worked and build some stretchers for him. So I was busy working. It was a hot August, July, I think. Anyway, it was very, very hot. And I was working, putting these stretchers together. And he was sitting in front of a large composition he was working on. And he was sitting there for so long, hunched over, that I was beginning to worry that he might not be well because of the heat. He was an elderly man. And I went up to him and I said, "Cleve, are you okay?" And he went, "Oh, yeah." I said, "Well, what's going on?" He said, "I'm just looking at this." I said, "Looking at what?" And he goes, and he points. And he had taken some crimson color, and he worked in impasta, right, with heavy, right? And he had taken, and in a certain place in the canvas, he had put this heavy glob of crimson on the canvas. And in the heat, the oil had started to run down the canvas, right? Not part of his composition, not part of his ego, right?
Yeah.
Not his intent. So I said, "Well, Cleve, how are you going to fix that?" And he said, "Oh, I'm not going to fix it. I'm just trying to figure out how to work with it." Okay. Now, interesting in terms of ego.
Yeah.
Right? Because he's accepting the coincidence. He's accepting the happenstance.
Yeah.
He's put his ego aside to some extent.
Yeah.
And accepted something spontaneous. I'm sure that if you were to talk to some of the other modern artists like de Kooning and whatever, is throwing paint around, yeah, okay, but even Da Vinci or Botticelli or Rembrandt knows that a brushstroke can be a mistake.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do you work with it?
Yep.
My father was a watercolor artist.
Oh, yeah.
You cannot correct a mistake in watercolor.
Yeah.
It's impossible. Oil, you can correct mistakes. Acrylics, you can correct mistakes.
Yeah.
Watercolor, once it's sunk into the paper, you're done.
Yeah. What was the motive of the cave artist? Your hunch or guess?
Well, we don't know too much about their social interaction with each other as a group, right? We don't really know. So maybe, and I suspect that women had more to do with some of that painting than men. But either way, Gluck goes into the cave and he starts painting. This is the hunt that we had last week. And there's my hand to print. I painted that.
Yeah.
I mean, was he trying to talk to a deity? Maybe. I don't know. He carved the Venus of Nuremberg or whatever that chunky little pregnant statue is. They made these temples that looked like uterine caves.
Yeah.
As mysteries to birthing the spirit. You think that was an accident? You think it's an accident that a Catholic church looks like the uterine channel? You enter through the nave, you get to the altar, you have two places on either side that bring the ghost to the middle, and then you mix it all up and you get the body of Christ? Or you think that's just where did that come from? You don't think they're replicating the female organs? Of course they are.
Yeah.
Because it's the only mystery that we've ever had.
Yeah.
How does life begin? Well, we know now how it begins, but that doesn't change the fact that life is a mystery.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a funny little thing. Going back to knowing what we're about. This mark here in our upper lips,
Yeah.
Okay. My mother would say that when you are a child in the womb, the angel of life comes into the womb and whispers the secret of life in your ear and then goes, shh. And that's the mark of that finger telling you to keep the secret.
Wow.
Yes.
So I believe we all have the secret.
Yeah.
Tell no one.
We can't help ourselves. That's why we write poetry and paint things and go kill each other.
Because you mean we're trying to tell other people metaphorically?
It has to come out somehow
Yeah.
because it's what moves you.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, okay, you're hungry, you're horny, you're angry, you're frightened, you're lonely, you're whatever. But why? What do all those things? How does all that register if you didn't have some inner sense of life?
Yeah.
Why would you be lonely if you had no inner sense of life? Why would you be horny if you had no inner sense of life?
Yeah.
Why would you care?
Yeah.
You wouldn't.
Yeah. What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Well, they get in each other's way. Conviction can be either a grand achievement or a fatal mistake, and compromise can be the same.
Yeah.
So you can compromise and fail, and you can compromise and succeed. You can have conviction and be wrong. You can have conviction and be right. Goes back to balance, doesn't it?
Yes. Is perception reality?
As far as I know.
Moshe
What else
felt
do I have to? What else do I have to go on?
that's it. One of my friends said that's all we got is perception.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. He says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness. Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Forgiveness.
Wow. But what do
Always.
you mean you didn't have forgiveness and that was the strength you turned it into?
Being able to forgive somebody is a weakness. Being accepting is a form of weakness. People say, "Why didn't you stand up for yourself?"
Yeah, I see.
Right? Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that?
Yeah.
Well, in the long run, if you can accept the circumstances and forgive the unjustness of the world, you're stronger for it.
Yeah.
And you don't blame the world for being unjust.
That's it. Mark Twain said, forgiveness is the smell the flower gives off when the foot steps on it.
Yeah, that's true. But it also helps it also seeds it for the next one. So there you go.
Yep. Dimitri, there's a line that goes, you create what you resist. The comedian Bob Goldthwait morphed it into, you are what you hate. James Joyce said, it's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve. And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, thank God I'm an atheist. So
well,
how do you respond to that line? You create what you resist. I'm not saying you, but one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Well, I saw Bob Goldthwait when he first started as a comedian because I hired him.
Yeah.
And I remember one of his first comedy routines. And I lost my job the other day. Well, I didn't lose it. I mean, I know where it is and everything, but I go there and there's this other guy doing it. And a few minutes later, I lost my girlfriend. Well, I didn't lose her. I mean, I just go there and there's this other guy doing it. Anyway, his early routine was pretty alarming
Yeah.
because it was right down the edge of psychosis.
Yeah.
He came off stage after having everybody with chills going up and down their spines for having laughed at something that was absolutely unnerving.
Yeah.
And it was genius. And he came off, very sweet guy. He came off stage and he said, "What do you think? Too much?" And I said, "Almost." and he goes, "Good." I went, "Yeah, really."
Well, it's funny because he actually says that in a lot of his feature films. I haven't seen them all, but it's a theme. You are what you hate. It's a funny little twist of that. You create what you resist.
Yeah. And it's possible. I don't quite go that. I wouldn't quite go that far because very often what we hate is the thing that we strive the most to not be.
Yeah.
So if you want to look at somebody, you could say, well, what is he? He's a reflection of his hatred, but that doesn't mean he's the substance of it.
Yeah.
And there's a difference. So if you hate injustice, becoming a lawyer or a judge or an advocate for rights doesn't mean that you've become your hate. It means that you have identified something you hate and have struggled against it. I think there are people who are vanquished by their hate, and they are dangerous and bitter and not very pleasant to be around.
Yeah.
And in many cases, they're failed human beings for that reason.
Yeah.
No, I think it's the human beings that struggle against their weaker natures that are they're important because of their failing and because of their effort not to.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Dimitri, you brought up identity, and this self-identity thing is something that comes up in both Krishnamurti and McLuhan said violence is the human search for identity.
That's a little simple.
Yeah.
So's tenderness.
Yeah. It's good.
Okay, so what are you going to say to that? I mean, if I were to really look at what's the greatest search for identity, it would be intimacy.
Yes, that's good.
I mean, if you can't accomplish tenderness and intimacy, you're a fairly hollow human being.
Yeah. Do you think you got that from the way your parents raised you or on your own?
I don't know. I mean, my parents were pretty anomalous to my culture, so I can't really speak to that very well. I mean, my mother was bipolar, so there wasn't a lot of. I mean, there was some interesting revelations in that experience of being brought up by somebody whose emotional weather vane spun around like a top hat. On the other hand, my father was a failed aristocrat and a European, and he never understood this culture. And he was also a man married to a bipolar woman who had a child, and he was sort of stuck in a culture that he didn't understand, trying to make a living with an art that wasn't appreciated in a culture that didn't particularly get him. And so, he was a mixture of many contradictions and conflicts. So where did I get those things? I don't know. I certainly got a sense of acceptance of human nature that one should have foremost in your mind. You can't judge other people. We're all failed.
Yeah.
And if you don't appreciate them for their failures and their shortcomings as much as what they are capable of, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
And you're also either elevating yourself or denigrating yourself in the process. So
Yeah.
get over it, you know.
That's one of my favorite Zappa lines is, I'm a failure, but I'm not a miserable failure.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point.
Yeah. How do you find peace of mind?
What?
You want me to repeat the question or move
No, that was my answer.
on? What?
What?
Okay, 5 Alan Watts questions, just short off the top of your head in a couple words. 1, who started it all?
Lucy,
Are we going to make it?
maybe.
Where do we put it?
Wherever we can't carry it.
Who's cleaning it up?
Not me.
5 is it serious?
Always.
Wow.
Sometimes.
Okay, Dimitri, a few more and we're out of here. This has been truly enlightening. I thank you so much. If you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Be braver.
Wow. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Under.
Wow. You're in the minority there.
I don't give a shit.
I don't give a shit. That's good.
It's the most efficient way to handle it.
If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
Hmm. Well, I mean, I could be a little flip and say I tried.
Yeah. They want to scent the glue and the binding. What smell?
Lavender.
If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Somewhere deep in the woods where someone would happen to cross it by accident. And, oh, I don't know, bronze, I guess.
Cool. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Musical skill.
It's good. If you were in a vat of vomit up to your neck and someone threw a bag of shit at your face, what would you do?
Wipe it off.
That is a good practical answer. Thank you. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
The realization that we have to find a different way to operate from consumerism to sustainability.
Yeah, it's good. I agree.
And it may not be easily accomplished, but it's the necessity that will eventually force us to accept.
What's a question that remains unresolved for you?
What if I hadn't jumped off the rock onto another rock and broken my foot?
Oh, that you told that whole story in number one. That is a great, and then it goes on and on. That is a great question. That's like they asked John Cage a question and he goes, "That's a very good question. I wouldn't want to ruin it with an answer."
It's true, though. I often wonder about that.
Yeah.
I mean, I know the path, the trajectory my life took as a result.
Yeah.
I often wonder what would have happened differently.
What would happen? Yeah.
A totally incidental moment.
Yeah. Amazing.
And if you think about it, life is comprised of a myriad of incidental moments. Yeah. Every single one of them altered the trajectory you thought you were on.
Yeah.
So much for your ego.
That's kind of James Joyce saying you can find epiphanies in everydayness.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can also go with what my father said, which is that God gave us free will, but only one choice.
Yeah. That was a good one. Only one choice. Yeah. There's a lot of gems in that first session and this session. Dimitri, two more and we're out of here. This is Thornton Wilder in 28. He said, "Art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time." You've laid your cards on the table for hours. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Well, I never actually had a clear idea ever.
Yeah.
And that's perhaps why throughout the course of my life, I have constantly looked for identity in different forms of expression.
Yeah.
And manner and behavior. And I also have deep concerns about some of my motivations for things that I've done. And I'm not entirely pleased with some of that revelation. I don't profess to have answers to any of that. I don't know.
But is that the searches, the journey's more important than the destination?
Well, the destination is death. So what else are we going to do but journey?
Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Where do you think you're going?
Yeah.
You're here, you're doing something, you're living, and tomorrow the San Andreas Fault may open up and you're going to be in the Pacific Ocean. How do you fucking know?
Yeah. Well,
so
yeah. It's that uncertainty.
Yeah, and I mean, there may be one reason why I'm not particularly ambitious, but you take it as it comes. You do what you can within the scope of your experience and your circumstances, and then you step off the curb and get hit by a bus.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what it evoked there for a second is flaneur, psychogeography. The people in Paris in the 20s were changing the world, and they were just sitting there drinking coffee, and they didn't have like, oh, we got to go do something. It was just like go with the flow and just wander aimlessly. In other words,
well, they were doing what presented itself to them in a locus point that had attracted them to a place.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. And that locus point attracted a certain kind of people, and the people that were already there got affected by the influx and the interaction, as well as the mechanisms of the times that were altering the social fabric, and
Yeah.
they found themselves in a place that was happening.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. So 1967 hippies, what's the difference?
Same difference. Amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't know what we were doing, but somehow something
Yeah.
leaked out of that period and it infused the culture of the world. And it's still out there because it was necessary.
Yeah.
Just as other things, good and evil, have done throughout
Yeah.
history. I mean, we're still struggling with the balance of things. I mean, we are the recipients of the Renaissance, and we are still under the shadow of Genghis Khan and Hitler.
Yeah.
Well, what are you going to do?
Yeah.
Do your best. Try to be nice.
That's so good. I love it. It's those 4 words you said: tenderness, sarcasm, cynicism, and encouragement. I love those 4 words. And you had also evoked Auden, the poet, said, the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. And you know, Breck says, I want art that activates you, not puts you in a trance. But art that puts you in a trance might eventually lead to activation.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like the key. I like the key word in the Auden quote is the mystery, is that we don't know, but you know.
Well, I mean, Buddha is a good example. I mean, Buddha wouldn't consider himself an activist, would he?
No. Yeah. That's
Okay,
right.
but think of the activism that Buddhism has created.
Yeah.
And it's in its passivity, the very gravity of its passivity created. So, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
I mean, every prophet falls on the corpses of their followers.
Yeah.
That's the sad truth.
Yeah. It reminds me of the guy climbs up the hill and meets his guru, and he says, what's the best question I can ask you? And the guru says, the one you just asked me.
Yeah, right.
What
And
gives you, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Yeah. What gives you the most optimism?
I believe in the human spirit.
Yeah. Well, Dimitri, this has been outstanding. You know, the first question is, what is the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being. You said community. Very good. The last question is, what gives you the most optimism? That's what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. And he says, other people, the human spirit. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you so much, Dimitri. This has been truly fun and enlightening. And I really appreciate our time together. Thank you.
Well, it was enjoyable, and I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your enthusiasm for assembling all these different voices to broadcast their ideas. I think that's a wonderful thing to be doing. I applaud that.
It's fun, and I appreciate you turning me on to Michael, because we're doing part 2 with Michael upcoming.
Good, terrific. He's an interesting man.
Indeed. Love from Susie, Dimitri. I'm going to hit end broadcast, but I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever.
I hope so too. Love to Susie too. Keep
Okay.
shaking it, girl.
She's sending love and kisses. Thanks, Dimitri.
Okay.